Esohe, are you there?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm sorry. I think I need to get a neutral background.
Oh.
But I've got a lot of noise. I've got a lot of noise in the background, and I don't know if you can hear me well.
Oh, we can hear you
There's
great.
quite a lot of noise.
How are you? Can you hear us?
I can't hear you very well.
Okay.
I think I need to move my venue.
Okay.
Let me just pause a little bit and now move.
Okay.
Maybe somewhere there's a bit less. Okay. All right.
Okay. That sounds great. We'll wait right here.
Do I pause that? Okay, just a second. Fernando de Pesca. Oh my goodness. That should do it.
Hi.
I think I may have resolved my problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I think so. Hello, everybody.
Perfect.
Hello.
Let me try to increase the volume.
Okay.
Yeah, it's at maximum.
Okay.
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 Yes.
Well, so hey, I am Caleb Benedum. I'm the program manager for the Tip Report Global Heroes Network from TIPHeroes.org. And I'm here at the Freedom Center. And joining me today are Kristen Wayne Scott. Kristen, would you say hi?
Hello. How are you?
Hi.
And
Hi, Kristen.
she is a student at the University of Cincinnati, and she's also interning here. Then also Cazzie Reyes, who's a researcher. Cazzie, would you say hi?
Hello.
Hi.
And then also we have Anya. And Anya, I'm sorry, would you just state what your last name is as well? Anya just started with us yesterday, and then we also have Christy Apisa. So if you guys could introduce yourself as well.
Anya Edwards. I attend Xavier University here in Cincinnati, and I just joined the team as an intern, and I'm really excited to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Hi, I'm Christy. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too. Hi, Christy.
Perfect. So
Hello, everybody.
I
Oh,
thought,
it's kind of gone off. Okay.
okay.
Well, I must confess that this is my very first time on Google Hangouts, so
Mine
I'm a
too.
bit how do you say? Um, so I'm trying to, kind of wrap my head around it. So
Sure.
have some patience with me. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a lot of our first times actually. But it's a great tool. So,
Yeah.
um,
Sure.
so we just thought that we'd start off and just talk with you about sort of your work and what you do. And Christy, if you want to start off, just ask the question.
Absolutely. We were wondering if you might be able to tell us a little bit about your journey that led you to do anti-trafficking work and then ultimately the founding of your organization.
Hmm. Well, I'm a lawyer by profession. I'm Nigerian, of Nigerian origin, and I found myself in Italy for a postgraduate program, which was supposed to be a 3-month program in Turin. I had never been to Turin. That was my first time. But I had already had some information. I'm talking about the early 1990s, 92. And there were discussions about some of our women finishing up in prostitution in Europe. But it was something that was really, like hearsay. You really didn't get people talking about it that much. Getting here, while I was at the ILO center where I was based, I had occasion to be invited by the police because they had had a case involving some Nigerian women, and they had heard that there was a Nigerian who was doing a postgraduate at the ILO center. And so they contacted me. I was asked to do a kind of translation, and I didn't speak Italian then, so I had to do a 3-way translation between myself, a classmate of mine from Belgium who could speak Italian, English, and so it was from my language to English, from English to Italian. So we did this kind of roundabout. And that was how, during my course, sometimes I was called by the police to intervene. After that, I started my doctorate here, and I had to learn the language. And the municipal council asked me, I was approached and asked to act as what is called a cultural mediator, which goes beyond being an interpreter. It also includes being able to decode the cultural contents of the words that people say, even if they're speaking the same language. And that is how, a little at a time, I got into this kind of activity. I got to know about the problem of trafficking. I got to speak with some of the women who were trafficked. To be quite frank, at the beginning, I didn't want anything to do with all of that. I just wanted to do my postgraduate study, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that period, it was really a bit challenging. But when I got speaking with some of the women, it was like, well, you just can't let this go. You have to do something. You have to act. And even that little bit, I mean, just speaking with them, for them, it was like, oh, wow, somebody else from my country who speaks my language is willing to speak with me. And it was a lot of, I could see that it was like a huge kind of thing, even if for me it was nothing really. I mean, you're just speaking with someone, but it made a lot of difference when you think that these are women who found themselves in some of the most terrible conditions alone, in a country where the language, the color, the food, the air you breathe, everything is completely different, and they felt kind of lost. So to be able to speak with someone who could, because at that time I had begun to also understand the language, who could act as a kind of buffer between them and the new system, was for them was quite a lot of help. So that's how I got into that. At a certain point, I found that I needed to have an organization that could handle things in a certain way that I felt would be much better for this group of women. And so in 1998, I decided to set up my organization. I started out in the corner of my bedroom, and the internet was becoming something much more common. I remember then I had a laptop that was so heavy, I really couldn't carry it around with me. And then to connect to the internet, you had to wait like, oh wow, a long time. It was really at the beginning of things. So, but through the internet, I was able to make contacts with other organizations in Europe, attended meetings, and well, the organization grew, and today here we are. Yeah.
Awesome. I have another question for you as well.
Yes.
We've been doing quite a bit of research on TIPHeroes as we're preparing we're doing a tip hero of the day, and we see that you've worked with one of our TIPHeroes programs, NAPTIP. Do you still work with NAPTIP? And if so, what is that relationship like?
Oh, yes. We've had quite a lot of, as an organization, we've had quite a lot of collaborative activities with NAPTIP. We organized a conference, an international conference on trafficking, with them in 2007 in Benin. Benin City is the capital of the state where the greater number of Nigerian women who are trafficked come from. And so the kind of collaboration we have with them is a continuous one where when sometimes we have women who come to us and report to the police, we form part of a regional and national network of organizations. So when some of the women make reports to the police, the traffickers put pressure on them through their families back home, and maybe go to threaten their families or try to destroy properties or have them imprisoned. So when such things happen, and then the families will then normally contact the women and ask them to drop the police report, not to go ahead with it. So what we normally do is to contact NAPTIP and ask the family to go to NAPTIP and report any incidents of threats or attacks so that NAPTIP can then handle it from there. That is one way in which we collaborate. Other ways in which we collaborate is like when they wanted to do a kind of a documentary. And so we were asked to prepare the ground, contact prosecutors, other organizations, and so on and so forth. And so we prepared the ground for them. They came, spent a couple of weeks, did this documentary, and went back. And I think they are using that as a kind of instrument of awareness raising in Nigeria. So these are some of the ways in which we collaborate.
Awesome. Thank you.
So in regards to, I'm Anya, by the way, just to introduce myself. In regards to your passion of sex trafficking, they've seemed to recently call into question some of the statistics around sex trafficking in regards to the exaggeration or the accuracy of those statistics. In your perspective, do you think this is a true or false accusation, and what can you offer towards that opinion?
First and foremost, the question of trafficking involves human lives. And you have very different situations. When I say different situations, I mean there are instances when it will be an obvious case, obvious to who is aware of what it's all about, case of trafficking, but to others it could be anything else. Like someone who comes to you and says, oh, I asked a friend of mine to help me to travel to Europe. And you say, oh, well, this one is not a victim of trafficking. She was helped. She asked to be taken to Europe. But for someone who knows what it's all about, when they use that word help, it does not necessarily mean that they are not being exploited. And trafficking has to do with exploitation. Now, these are men, women, children who are trafficked using false names many times, in many cases without documents. in many cases from countries where you don't have adequate identification systems in place, and so you don't really have correct numbers or statistics relating to names, dates of birth, etc., etc. Okay, so with that premise, the reality of the situation is we don't actually have the accurate number of those who are being trafficked. But our belief is that those who are actually being trafficked are much more in number than what is being reported. So when people then come back and say, oh, there's a huge exaggeration going on, maybe because organizations want to, for funding purposes, sometimes they say, or because they want to create a kind of fear in people, an exaggerated kind of fear, my answer is that we need to work more to exchange data, to have a kind of internationally based database from where you can get information, and that will give us the exact fact, and we will discover that it's much more than we think, because more and more people are coming in, and we know that each week, from what women we work with, the kind of information they bring to us, we know that of maybe 10 women who come to us or to our partners to ask for help, double that number don't come. They just don't come. So the numbers, that the statistics we have, though they are not perfect, though there are a lot of uncertainties about it for reasons I already stated, they are not exaggerated. Not at all.
Okay. Well, moving, I guess, from numbers to people, because as we know, each statistic stands for a person, and to attach a number to them is difficult. So moving to their human approach, with the victims that are involved within sex trafficking, I guess, how can we integrate them better into modern day society? And are there any ways to improve upon the ways that we're doing so now?
I would avoid using the word integrate them,
Okay.
because in the sense that they form part of the society, but something terrible has happened to them. Those that I think need to be integrated.
So reacclimate, is that better?
Sorry? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. There's a gap.
I think it's breaking up. I said, so should we say reacclimate?
Yes, well, yes, okay. We should use that. If I understood your question correctly, you're asking in what ways can we assist them to regain their lives back, right?
Exactly.
Okay. One is, I'll use the examples of women we have supported. Okay. When they come to you, they are in such a state that sometimes there's this tendency to want to take over everything and help them to get out of this horrible situation, and to kind of treat them like, you know, they're babies, because they are so vulnerable, lost, seemingly unaware of what the next decisions have to be. So what we do, the very first thing you do is you listen to them. You listen to what they've been through. And you can have someone sitting in front of you and telling you some of the most horrible things. Like I heard today, I was in a meeting today, and I heard some of the most terrible things being said in such a matter-of-fact manner by a woman who was telling me how she had been trafficked across the desert. They were packed into those small trucks, about 35 people in a truck that usually takes 4 people, and how some of them died and were buried by the side of the road, and they would take off, and then they got to where they were going, and she was enslaved because she couldn't pay a certain amount, and then someone paid and bought some of them. You know, those kind of horrible things in a very matter-of-fact way. You have to listen. And that's part of the assistance they feel because they are getting it all out. And then you come to a kind of agreement of a project on how they see themselves. You take it a little at a time. A year from them, a year from that moment, how do they see themselves? So together you agree on a project of what we call a reinsertion project, in the sense of they are learning to trust. Trust is the first thing, learning to trust other people again, having the possibility of a safe place. Okay, you listen, you provide a safe place where they feel they can open up and talk about what has happened. And of course, it's not something that you ask, you get immediately. It takes time. And of course, then there are all the other things you need to put in place. In a country like Italy, where most of them don't speak the language, so you have to prepare language courses, the basic necessities that they need, because in many cases, they are running away and leaving everything that they have. And so protection, resources, language training, support, psychological support. You're going to need a lot of that. And psychological support is usually, again, listening very carefully to what they need, and they will be the ones to tell you what their needs are and how they think will be best to satisfy such needs.
Well, thank you for such passionate answers.
I beg your pardon?
I said thank you for such passionate answers.
Oh, thank you.
I was taking notes if you saw me looking down. I was like, oh, let me get all of this on my pad.
We were also wondering if you might be able to give us some personal perspective and commentary on the proposal for red light districts and the zones of tolerance in Rome, and how that's actually affecting your work as well.
Well, as you know, there are two main views on the question of prostitution and trafficking.
Absolutely.
There are those who, if I'm going on for too long, just tell me halt and I'll stop and
No, it's great.
summarize. All right.
As long as we can get you.
Yeah, we're here to talk to you. So.
Okay. Now there are two main schools, let me call it that, of thought on the question of prostitution and trafficking. There are those who believe that prostitution is a completely different thing and has nothing to do with trafficking, and that trafficking is often a question of sex workers, so-called sex workers, who have not been able to negotiate good working conditions for themselves. That's one school of thought. And so they want the legalization of everything around prostitution, pimping, brothel keeping, everything. And then there's the other school that says, well, why do women, and I say women because the greater majority of those in prostitution are women, why do they, quote and unquote, decide to go into prostitution? And they say you find that, one, it's a question of patriarchy, a question of systems that commodify, they objectify the female body and feel that women should not be in professions but should sell their bodies. They should make themselves available as a way of satisfying whatever needs they have. And as such, they feel that prostitution is a violence, is one of the oldest forms of violence against women. The end product, the end objective of trafficking that prostitution and trafficking are very closely linked, because those who traffic women traffic them to satisfy an ever-expanding and demanding market for their bodies for paid sex. And so that this should be discouraged, that those who exploit them, those who buy them, those who sell them should be the ones who should be punished, and those who are in prostitution should not be punished. And so they advocate, on the contrary, they should be given resources, needed resources to exit prostitution where they want to. And that is the so-called Nordic model. Now, laying this basis, the situation in a country like Italy, for instance, is such that at this point in time, there is still a law, a 1958 law, that was passed by, that was pushed for by a female senator at that time, who had received a lot of requests from women in prostitution, women in brothels in Italy, because brothels in Italy then were legal, pleading with her to find some way to stop it, because what was happening to them was an extremely exploitative and violent thing. And so that law was passed, making it was no longer a crime to be in prostitution, but the exploitation of the prostitution of others is a crime. So that's the situation right now in Italy. Now, when you see, when the economic and social conditions of women are okay, you would hardly find women or men or anybody else for that instance deciding to go into prostitution. It is when there are no valid alternatives, when there is a huge economic, financial, and social crisis, that you find people choosing prostitution as an alternative. And that is precisely what is happening right now. When I think back to my youth, and I think back in time to maybe 25, 30 years ago, the kind of enormous move, the kind of enormous involvement of people in prostitution that you have now, and the trafficking behind it, did not exist. You just heard about, I mean, you really didn't even hear about trafficking. There seemed to be things that had passed. The question of modern day slavery that we have now, and that's what's happening, we didn't have it 30 years ago. And if you look at the current economic and social situation of people, you find that conditions have deteriorated enormously. And so it goes hand in hand, you see. So in Rome, there is this proposal to reopen the brothels, and those who are pushing for this kind of activity are basing their request on the fact that right now Italy is going through a very bad economic crisis. There are no jobs, and so they offer prostitution to women as an alternative to finding a job. I'll give an example of a couple of 3, 4 young women that I know who have at least 2 degrees and who have been looking for jobs for more than 5 years. They've never had any regular stable job, and they keep getting offers from men who say to them, why don't you come into this kind of activity? I mean, we can find a way to make you do it without too much damage. Now, the question of prostitution and our position relating to that is not a question of morality. Absolutely not. It is not a religious kind of approach. It's a question of human dignity. Now, there's a level to which one can say, oh, everything is, there's extreme freedom. Extreme freedom is just as dangerous as repression. When you say extreme freedom, means that someone's intimacy, the most intimate of someone's body is placed in the marketplace as an object, because prostitution has to do with the consumption of the human body in a sexual act for payment. So when people tell you it's services, we're talking about services, I tell them, no, this is not a question of services. Services is like, you ask me to write a report on, I should do a study and write a report. So I use my brain to do a study and write my report. You don't have to open my brain to look inside to see if, things are exactly the way I said. The report says it to you, and those are the services that my intellectual services to you. In prostitution, it is the human body that is used physically to satisfy a need. And so we need to differentiate this from what you would call any other job. So the situation now in Italy is that there are these members of parliament who are asking that the 1958 law be abrogated and that they reintroduce brothels with certain new conditions. One, that those who are in prostitution should first of all get a certificate from a psychologist stating that they are in the mental condition to be able to carry out this kind of activity. Secondly, they are to pay about 1,000 euros every month for the dubious privilege of being able to be in prostitution. So the state becomes a pimp and exploits those in prostitution, because this amounts to exploitation. If they pay that, they call this a kind of license fee of 1,000. I'm not aware there's any other profession in Italy where that kind of amount, of money is requested to be paid in order to exercise any profession. So that is already an exploitative condition. And then there is also the third part of it that says that courses should be carried out in high schools, starting from junior high school, to teach youths that prostitution is not really a bad thing as such, and we are very much, the first time I read that, I was really appalled. One, because, like I said, it's a question of human dignity, a question of the protection, the refusal to allow half of our population to be considered as objects that you can put on the market, sell, buy, consume, and dispose of like any other objects. I think any civil society, any society that declares itself as a civilized society that has the interest of its citizens in mind, would not take that road. So I'm sorry if I've gone round, to make a long and winding journey about this, but I think, and my organization, we believe it's one of the most horrible things that could happen if it goes through. So we are doing everything possible to contest it and to make people to say no, not on our watch. We're not going to allow that. Absolutely. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I have one last question. Yes. As we know, well, as you know all too well, anti-human trafficking work is emotionally exhausting. How do you maintain hope in your cause?
I don't understand the question very well. What do you mean? How do you
stay on the course? How do you stay upbeat? And instead of, you hear all these sad and awful stories all the time, how do you stay motivated?
Yeah, I get what you mean. The first few years of working in anti-trafficking and getting to hear some of the most terrible stories, I think they were some of the most difficult, and it gets to a point you need to learn to protect yourself, and you need to build a wall between yourself and the person you have in front of you, not because you don't want to assist, but because you need to create a distance in order to be able to see things from an objective perspective and to give an appropriate response. When you get too emotionally involved, it's very difficult to respond to problems. So you then learn to do that. You learn to, it's an all-encompassing activity. You never have time off. Your phone is on 24 hours, 7 days a week, you know. It gets to a point you have to learn to break that because it becomes a kind of chain. You break it, you have to do some psychotherapy because you also have to, it goes to touch some of your own personal history many times, and you need to separate the two. And what happens is that you then learn to distance yourself, much as that is difficult. There are many times that there are still stories that break through that barrier. You just can't help it, but you have to learn to take it out of your head. And that involves a lot of training, a lot of psychological training and activity. Yes.
Thank you.
That is it.
Well, so hey, we've been talking for about 45 minutes, so I have just one question, and then I think we'll wrap it up. We won't keep you too late, but thank you so much for talking with us today.
Not at all.
So what? We're all either students or freshly in the workforce, but we are all interested in doing anti-human trafficking work and in fighting against human trafficking. So to us, and then also to anybody else who wants to get involved in anti-human trafficking work, what would you say to people that want to get involved? What are the types of things you would say to them, and how would you tell them to get involved?
The communication was a bit broken.
Okay.
So let me repeat to you what you said, and let me see if I got it all. It was like, well, for you that you want to, you're looking at getting involved in trafficking issues, how and what does one need to do to get involved? Did I get that right?
Right. So if someone were to come to you and ask, how can I get involved in anti-human trafficking work, what would your answer be?
Okay. Okay. Got that. Yes. My answer would be that first and foremost, you get as much information as you can about what the issues really are, what the issues involved are. So once you get that information, then you find an organization that where you can begin to do some voluntary work to get to get a feel of the practical aspects of it. Voluntary work would also involve like understanding what your chosen organization needs. It could be like support activities. It could be any of the most simple. It could also be being involved in diffusing alerts. Alerts are actions that the organization can carry out to alert governments to what is happening. And so the more people you have to whom that information get, the better. So anybody who has access to social media can use Twitter, Facebook, whatever to help to diffuse that information. Fundraising activities. My organization has had a lot of support in that sense, that people we didn't even know would do things like bake a cake and amongst friends sell the cake and send us some money. And so we did a small fundraising activity, and these are the proceeds. They were really very exciting things. Sometimes they weren't large amounts, but they made quite a difference to the young people we were supporting, who at that point needed some. So this is also another way to do that. And then to also organize small seminars with friends who really don't want to have anything to do with that, to encourage them to get involved, to say, even you as one person, if you are able to talk to one other person, you're already, expanding the level of knowledge amongst people. Because even now, with so much information available, there are still millions of people who tell you they have no idea what trafficking is all about. And we need to have that information out there to know that things are happening and people need to get involved in one way or the other. So that's what I'll say to them.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any last questions for Esohe?
It was lovely meeting you.
Yes, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, it was wonderful having you on here. We're hoping to. These are automatically recorded. I was hoping to go ahead and post this on TIPHeroes.org if you don't mind. But we're really excited that you were able to talk to us today, even just for 45 minutes or so. It's been really nice.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely speaking with all of you. And if you have more questions, anytime you want to talk about cases, I'll be very willing to speak with you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry about the previous times that there was that gap in communication. It was my fault. I do apologize for that. Okay.
Not a problem. And we hope you're feeling better.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway,
all right.
We're going to go ahead and sign off.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.